Hello, hello, everybody. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, indeed. Hello, Anna.
Hello. Hello, hello. And hello to everybody joining us today from wherever you are in the world. We are so glad to have you here. I'm Anna, and I have the privilege of looking after Treedom's mission here in the UK, where I'm sitting now. Not too rainy, which is good. But I also have the privilege of hosting you all here on the webinar today. And today we're going to talk about sustainability and climate change, which of course are fairly broad topics. So we do have a specific goal, and that is that you can all hopefully leave feeling positive, feeling full of ideas and inspiration on how to be the proponents of the positive change that we need to see in the world. In that strand, a line that we like to repeat and use at Treedom is, you do not go into battle or challenge with pessimism, because by definition, you will not win. And that, of course, is a famous line from Christiana Figueres, who is the Executive Secretary of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. For many, she is the main architect of the Paris Agreement, but she also likes to define herself as a stubborn optimist, which at Treedom we agree is the mindset that we all desperately need to be able to have the energy to transform the reality that we're faced with into the reality that we need. So in order to try and cultivate a bit of that stubborn optimism, we have invited Rebecca and Patrick, who I'll introduce in a moment, to join us today and to answer your questions, the audience. I think it's important to note that every question here that we will ask, unless otherwise stated, has been submitted by a member of the audience. So this session really has been created by you, it's been created for you, and we really hope you enjoy it. So I will introduce Rebecca and Patrick to say all of the things they'll be too humble to admit about their career, and I'm sure they'll say hello as well. So it's my pleasure to welcome Rebecca Freitag. Rebecca is a research associate, thank you, Rebecca, research associate at the University of Applied Sciences in Potsdam, where she teaches an interdisciplinary course about sustainability. Rebecca is the former German UN Youth Delegate on Sustainable Development and accompanied the German delegation to the UN conferences with an extremely important mission to give young people a voice in that room. Thank you for joining us, Rebecca.
Glad to be here. Hi, Anna.
Hi. And of course, we have Patrick Worms here with us too. Patrick is a Cambridge-educated molecular geneticist. Patrick is in his second term as president of the European Agroforestry Federation and represents the Centre for International Forestry Research and World Agroforestry to policymakers, to donors, to corporate partners in Europe and beyond. Thank you, Patrick.
Pleasure to be here.
Great. So, brief introduction, but of course you're not here to hear me speak, you're here to hear the answers to all of these wonderful questions, and we've got lots to be getting on with. So I will quickly get us started. Patrick, this first one is for you, and with such an established career in the sector, I imagine you've probably seen this word's definition evolve over the years. So to get us started, a question has been asked, what does sustainable mean?
That's the the $64 billion question, isn't it? Sustainable is, I'm sure that many of you, and presumably the person who asked the question, has seen that famous XKCD cartoon showing that on the Google Ngram, the Google machine that counts words, the use of the word sustainable is rising to such a degree that if it's carried on linearly by the year 2035, every single word ever used in the English language will be the word sustainable. What this means is sustainability, of course, is a word that everybody uses to mean anything at all. The very basic idea behind sustainability is that you can continue using that resource ad vitam aeternam, far into the future. In other words, you're not damaging your capital base, you're not damaging your resource base. But I think it's actually inadequate to deal with the problems we're facing today. The world on which we live is a world that is already being heavily degraded by human needs and human greed. And what we need to think of is regeneration. Yes, you cannot regenerate a depleted oil well. That oil is never going to get back into that well. But you can regenerate depleted soils. You can regenerate depleted forests. You can regenerate the southern oceans, for example, by getting the krills and the whales to come back. So we can begin to understand that this planet is one that is now within our hands to manage. As Stuart Brand, a famous Californian futurist, once said, we have become as gods. We might as well be good at it.
Brilliant. Well, I hope that we can continue with that strand of optimism, turning sustainable narrative into regenerative.
Maybe if I can add something.
Yeah.
I would, at this point, I would like to quote one of my students, whom, at the very end of of the seminar, I was asking all my students, so how would you define sustainability? I got really interesting answers. And then one girl said, well, doesn't it mean to be conscious and to be like having awareness for everything we do? And I found this actually a pretty nice way. For example, conscious traveling means you do not go by plane because you will miss all the everything that is in between, but you rather go, I don't know, by train, for example, and just by being more aware about what we are doing, and thus also being maybe slower in a way, we are automatically more sustainable. And this is what I wanted to add at this point.
I'd like to push back on that, Rebecca, if I may. If we are mindful of our own impact, the impact of our everyday activities on the world, everybody thinks that's automatically a good thing. It's not. If you're mindful of your own things, that means that the bandwidth that is occupied in your mind about these questions is focused on what you are doing by buying this product or choosing that mode of transport. Yes, it will make a difference, but you're only 1 out of 8 billion people on this planet. The difference it will make is so tiny that it won't make any difference. Meanwhile, you already think you've done your thing. And you are not going to do what's really important, which is to be out there in the street, to lock yourself to the gates of the poison sellers, to vote, to convince your neighbors to vote, to change things, to shout from the rooftops, you bloody idiots, you have to change things. And there's many things that need changing. In Germany, for example, your new government has said it wants to close down coal plants by 2030. Great. But the climate plan, the energy plan they have makes absolutely no sense. You're not going to replace it with renewables. They've been trying for 20 years. They still have massive intermittency issues. Meanwhile, they're shutting down the one proven low carbon energy source they have, nuclear power. That kind of rank stupidity has to stop. And if you spend your time worrying about your own little impact, is this coffee sustainable or not, then you are going to spend less time worrying about these things. And that is why, interestingly enough, this idea of focusing on personal responsibility has been promoted by whom? By fossil fuel interests, by the oil interests. This was a PR strategy invented by, at the time, Chevron Oil, now part of ExxonMobil, back in the 1980s, and immediately embraced by all the other oil majors who also, oh great, we're going to get all the Greens to worry about their own brown rice instead of making our lives difficult. So let's be careful about that. Yes, it's good to take a train rather than a plane if you can. I was in Djibouti last week for the Great Green Wall, hard to reach by train. But it's too easy to let that turn into something that actually prevents you from taking the effective action that is so urgently needed.
My call for mindfulness didn't stop at only individuals or citizens, but of course, this would also include business leaders or politicians. Like, what would a mindful decision as a politician look like? It definitely also includes asking citizens, for example, about opinions. And as we know from all those citizen assemblies that we have already seen, they are mostly more ambitious than the actual political decision would be. And yes, I agree that only individual choices will not bring us to a healed world, but still, it also comes together then if we are enough individuals deciding to eat less meat or less carbs, this is also a huge effect. But in the end, you're right, we need to question also the bigger systemic like frameworks and infrastructure that we have.
It's the other way around. We need to change the system. And yeah, it's good if you eat a little bit less meat, but it's not important. If you become vegan tomorrow, it makes no difference to the planet whatsoever. If 5 billion people become vegan tomorrow, that makes a difference. But you're not going to get 5 billion people to become vegan unless you change the system, right? So it's back to the system.
I really do not like the separation between individuals and systems, because in the end, who does our institutions, our businesses, whom they consist of? Well, it's a number of individuals. So there's also this mindset shift that we need in order to get our leaders change also their perspective.
Yes, because one thing that you said, which is really important, is around the world, when you ask people, the vast majority of them want to do the right thing. They want their politicians to do the right thing. But then when it comes time to vote, they vote for Trump.
Yeah, it's paradox.
And this happens in many countries, right? Mm-hmm. So, and that is because when you're asking somebody a question such as, do you want action on climate change? They'll say yes. But when they're entering the voting booth, they are not acting with that question in their mind. They're acting with everything else that happened to convince them to vote a certain way. And again, it's a system issue. So I agree with you. What we do as individuals is crucially important. But what is most important is if as individuals we help our communities, our families, our friends understand these political processes and navigate them. And yeah, if at the same time reducing your own personal impact, obviously is something that's not bad.
Absolutely.
It's true. When we talk about like becoming more sustainable, we do not talk very often about voting the right party. And yeah, I agree. We have to get that into the sustainability mindset.
It's crucial, as they are our representatives. Mm-hmm. You and I don't have the time to sit down and review every law. That's what we pay lawmakers for. So the very least we can do is pick the right lawmakers, right? That's what elections are all about.
So continuing, I completely agree with both of you. And I think this is already what we're seeing is that the solution to such a complex and multifaceted problem must also be complex, multifaceted. We need that combination of micro to macro actions, decisions to be working alongside each other towards a common goal. So this nicely leads on to one of the next questions, Rebecca, which I'm going to direct to you, with the view to acting together to try and pursue this common goal of progress. What about the Sustainable Development Goals? Are they, as Greta put it, another form of blah, blah, blah?
No, they're not. And very often I'm actually quite sad about how underestimated they are being perceived. You have to imagine the 17 Sustainable Development Goals are part of that 2030 agenda that was signed by all 193 member states, right? I mean, just imagine a group work of 5 people, maybe coming even from the same country, how difficult it is to get to the same opinion. Now imagine you have 193 countries with different cultural and economic and so on background. And if you go through these goals, there are in total like 169 sub-goals plus 200 indicators. If you read them very carefully, you can say that it's actually almost a revolutionary agenda. Like it clearly says that, for example, to put up a sustainable farming or bike lanes or gender equality. And what is really good about the short SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, what's really good about them, because most UN agreements are kind of a toothless tiger. I mean, there are no sanctions, right? But what is our leverage tool here is that we have indicators. So we do measure progress each year and in each country. And now the SDGs are becoming even a baseline for investments. In my opinion, another big leverage of changing our world. So really, holding our governments, our local governments, our national governments accountable as they have signed it, they have agreed to it, really is a huge tool, an empowering tool that I recommend everybody to make use of, actually. And what I think is really groundbreaking here is also, in my eyes, the SDGs are kind of a toolbox, and even I would go beyond that, even a new pair of glasses to look at the world. Because each SDG, you can say, it kind of describe the crisis that we see in this world. Climate change being one of our crises, but it's not the only one. So I truly think when we go deeper, there is like this inner attitude or mindset, or however you want to call it, that is kind of wrong with how we look at the world, how we look at other people, at the planet. And the SDGs are telling us to again see the world in an interconnected way and to see the synergies. So let me give you one example. Friends of mine, they've started to teach migrant women to learn to cycle in Berlin. And with this one action, you can reach several benefits from the SDGs, right? Like you have gender equality, you have good health, you have climate action, and like also supporting our sustainable infrastructure in the city. So this is kind of the spirit. Like this is, you have like one action, several benefits. This is really how we now need to accelerate the transformation.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the SDGs are important precisely because it is the goal and the objective that you can hold in front of everybody. And you mentioned investors and corporations. It's striking that so many corporations are actually making genuine efforts to try to reach these SDGs. Yes, a lot is greenwashing, but there's an enormous amount of really good work that's happening behind the scenes as well to try to meet it. And one of the reasons why that is important is precisely because of this little game of cross the boxes, right? You gave the example of these women refugees learning how to cycle, and you crossed 5 or 6 of these boxes. And if you look at the indicators, maybe it's 10 or 15 of these indicators. There's about 250 in all of these indicators. And corporations are competing about how many of these indicators they can meet. So the SDGs are not going to be reached by 2030. That's absolutely certain. There's 8 billion of us. Everybody's getting richer. We already consume 150 billion tons of stuff a year, every single year. So yes, for each and every one of us, the idea would be repair, reuse, recycle. Just slow down, buy less, use less, fly less, of course. But we have to do that at the level of a species. And that's why the SDGs are important, because it's not in your power or in mine to figure out how to make this glass with less energy, but it is in the power of a glass company to begin to do that. And the glass company is looking at these SDGs and thinking, right, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this, and I can do that. And sometimes that leads to a paradox. I know of companies that have found much greener ways of doing things and that are implementing these much greener ways of doing things and that are saving money by implementing these much greener ways of doing things, but who are not communicating about it. Because in the markets in which they operate, green products have a reputation of being more expensive and of lower quality. So if you say that your product is green, your consumers are going to walk away rather than walk towards it. So you often have in business, at least in these particular markets, you often have in business the inducement to go greener because it saves you money and it allows you to reach the SDGs, but not necessarily to communicate to consumers about it. What's happening in the marketplace on these issues is absolutely fascinating.
You see, and this is exactly where we need that mindset shift, so that, even like when you say it's a B2B business, then it's probably the seller who need that mindset shift. So we also need to reach those individuals. And I also listened to a lot of examples where young people studied a certain subject to transform something greener in the business world. And then they entered that company, and then they kind of transform that certain product into a circular product, for example, from the inside out. So this also kind of works. And I would say we are on the path towards having a greener product really is an advantage, at least in Europe and also in Germany. We see more and more laws being implemented that really ask for it.
Brilliant. And because I'm going to move us along the conversation, I'm actually going to shift the focus ever so slightly back to something you mentioned earlier, Patrick, which is regeneration. We have had this question from a member of the audience, and they would like to speak specifically about reforestation and its role in our fight against climate change, specifically mitigation of atmospheric CO2. So we would like to know, does reforestation work better as a local action to preserve microclimates or as a systemic strategy to be included globally?
I think it's both. But I think the important thing is to understand what we mean by reforestation. After all, an oil palm plantation is a forest too. But yet I'm sure that the questioner would agree with me that replacing a peatland or a natural tropical rainforest with an oil palm plantation is not a very good idea. And indeed, in Europe, we have boycott campaigns against oil palm for precisely that reason. The same thing applies in other biomes. For example, right now, you have a gold rush for cashew happening in northern Côte d'Ivoire. Northern Côte d'Ivoire is it's not humid tropic anymore. It's semi-arid. So imagine a savanna. 200 years ago, it would have been filled with elephants and giraffes and what have you. Now all the animals have gone. And all of that landscape is being turned into large-scale plantations of cashews. A large-scale plantation of cashew is no better for the environment than a large-scale plantation of oil palm. So we've got to worry about what reforestation actually means. We always have to keep diversity in mind. A good forest is a forest that has a mixture of species in it with a mixture of ages, so that ecosystemic processes can happen in that forest. That means it's a forest that's going to be a little bit more expensive to manage. It's easy to grow 1,000 hectares of something and then to harvest it. It's a lot more difficult to grow 1,000 hectares of 200 different species and to go in and individually manage these species. We as humans have to be prepared to pay for that higher expenditure. And right now, we are not. The second thing that this means is we need to change the way our food system operates. I'm going to be sharing my screen, if I may.
Please.
Share screen. Boom. There we go. So I don't know if this is visible. It's a slide that says, money makes the world go around. And what this shows, I want you to focus first on the little picture at the top left. What you see is a typical landscape from northern Niger. You see a grassland, which is mismanaged, by the way, but let's not go there for the moment. And you see lots of shrubs and trees. All these shrubs and trees are thorny little things that you and I would just walk past. Look at the picture at the bottom left. What these things actually are shrubs and trees that produce seeds and that produce fruits, even in years when it's too dry to grow anything else, that are filled with nutrition. I mean, one of the things that grow there, and the first bush you see in the picture on the top left is a tree called Bossia senegalensis. It's got twice the protein content of millet, the cereal that's usually grown in these regions. It's filled with minerals. It's filled with vitamins. Yet these are the kind of shrubs and trees that farmers will burn or cut in order to make more room for cereals, despite the fact that these cereals will fail 2 years out of 3 because there's not enough water and have less nutrition. Why? First, because these foods are dismissed as famine foods. When European colonialists came, they analyzed these things. They found they were full of poisons, and so they published papers saying, oh my God, they're full of poisons, don't touch them, without noticing that the locals knew how to debitter them. We eat many plants that need to be transformed before they become edible to humans, right? Not everything is a sweet apple that you can pick off a tree and eat. But those papers made it into the literature. So ever since, development workers think, oh my God, we can't force people to eat these things. They're toxic. No, they're not. Just treat them properly. That's the first thing that happened. The second thing that happened is that people have forgotten these traditions. And the third thing that happened is there's no market for them anymore. The picture at the bottom left shows little boxes filled with labels for dozens of different foods gained from these thorny shrubs that grow in the desert. The picture in the middle shows the most luxurious hotel in Niamey, the capital of Niger. Why is that important? Because the company that is helping to rehabilitate these foods has discovered that the only way to get people to buy them is to ensure that the rich and powerful eat them and are seen to eat them. So get the restaurant of the luxury hotel to sell them. Get the president of the country to serve it at diplomatic dinners. enter these products into TV competitions for the best chef in Niger, that sort of thing. And that works because money makes the world go round. So it's to answer finally the question of the question that you received.
Yeah.
There we go. It's not just about forests, it's about diverse forests. And we need to understand how to put diverse forests back into the landscape. Everybody wants to make a living, especially poor farmers, right? We cannot ask poor farmers to conserve diversity after we've destroyed it in our own continent to become rich. That doesn't work. We have to help poor farmers figure out how they can themselves become rich by using their diversity. It's more difficult than just planting a tree, but it's a lot more profitable in the long run.
Agreed. So you would say that by blending carefully the worlds of the commercial with the world of agriculture and agroforestry in particular, we can hopefully help these so-called developing countries to boost their economies without damaging their environments.
Not just the developing countries. Step outside your London and go to the nearest plantation and look at how horrible that is. We have the same problems in rich countries alike. I think the important thing is to remember, if you're going to deal with natural systems, if you're an investor, for example, or commercial, diversity is key. If you want to regenerate, betting on diversity is a good idea.
Brilliant. Well, we completely agree. So Rebecca, we've had a lovely question from a very young climate enthusiast. And of course, as UN Youth Delegate, you are very well versed in helping these people to find their voice and use it for better. So the question was, how can children like me make a positive impact on the environment?
Yeah. I mean, I also feel that it can be very frustrating to see like adults making decisions that are not in line with how we want to see the world and how we actually want to live on this planet. But still, young people right now, we have such a huge power, and I can only say, like, really use them. They are listening to us now. So what I've been observing in the past years really is amazing that, once children come together and speak up, they are being heard, finally. I mean, it has been different maybe before that, but I met actually a lot of CEOs also who changed their business plan because their kids were demanding it at the breakfast table. And I really see in how far education nowadays is the other way around. Children tell their parents, why do we have to use another plastic bag for the fruits? Why do we have to go there again by car? It's really the other way around, and I can only underline that you have that power now. They listen to you and use that, and sometimes you also have to maybe use unconventional methods. So, for example, I once was in a school class where they painted pictures with fishes that were caught in plastic nets. And then they went to the supermarkets and
We've slightly lost you, Rebecca.
Looks like she's got network problems.
Okay. Well, Patrick, any thoughts on how to mobilize the younger generations?
I would second what Rebecca said, and I would add something else. Ask your parents, who will you vote for, mummy, and why? Have political discussions with your parents as well. Because in the end, if the city of Berlin has lots of cycle paths onto which you can teach migrant women to drive, or to cycle rather, it's because the city government has decided to build out cycle paths at the expense of cars. That's a political fight because drivers want to keep their roads. So it's important to understand that a lot of these decisions, yes, inside the home, you can decide, like I did, to put on more clothes instead of switching on the thermostat, right? But almost everything else outside the house is political. So inside the house, kids, you can turn down the thermostat, put on a jumper, maybe not ask for too many new presents at Christmas, but for anything to do with outside the house, don't just get on your parents to cycle rather than drive a car, but help your parents understand that these are political processes.
Very true. And would you say that, speaking just outside the home, of course, we have a global perspective here all the way down to an individual, but speaking about cities and towns, and please feel free to keep a global perspective of all the varieties of cities and towns that we, of course, have here. But regarding sustainability, how can you see a future where cities and towns are more resilient in that sense?
It's beginning to happen already. I mean, many cities are, especially in the pandemic and especially in Europe and also in North America, you've had many cities that have drastically reduced the amount of road space devoted to cars, that have increased their pedestrian zones, that have increased their cycle path. The best example I know of is probably Paris. If you remember Paris from 5 years ago and Paris today, the city is completely transformed. It's practically impossible to drive in that city now, and it's an extraordinarily pleasant city to cycle in, even when it's raining. So you can transform that, and cities are beginning to transform that. I think something else that's happening is people are beginning to realize that this modernist idea that comes from the 1920s, where you have offices here and housing here and industry here and transport there, it's rubbish, because people then always have to travel between these different things. That integrated facilities are a lot better. And you see that here in Brussels, for example. You see that with office blocks in office neighborhoods are being turned into flats with shops on the ground floor, with workshops in the back. So the idea that economic activities and life should be more closely integrated drastically reduces energy needs and travel needs. And I see many cities moving in that direction. Rebecca, you're back.
Yes, welcome back. You can probably tell what we're talking about, but I would love your thoughts as well on how cities and towns can become more resilient.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Sorry, I also wanted to add another story of myself and how far children can empower, but I can also continue with the resiliency, because. But let's talk about resilience, and I really love that question. As we, when we talk about climate change, we more and more talk about how to mitigate climate change, like how to stop it, and it's still important and good. But at the same time, we really need to also now talk more about how we can prepare ourselves for all those consequences of climate change. I mean, we have seen floods in Europe, and we have seen those fires this summer. And also these crises, plus also, of course, also the pandemic also showed us that we are kind of not that well prepared for those increasing consequences and crises and disasters that are going to come. And therefore, I'm currently in Portugal for a UN conference on disaster risk reduction. And they talk exactly about this, like how can we get prepared better? And they've identified 4 areas that we need to pay special attention to. And I kindly also agree with those areas. The first one is about actually understanding the disasters. So that means there are already systems out there that can tell you about next floodings or something. So risk assessment, basically, this is what it's called. The second one is about inclusive decision making, and that means that, or for me, it means that we also need to include the local level in decision making, because most of the time they know very best how resilience could look like in their own city. For example, I was in the flooding area in Germany this summer. And I met children and young people and so on, and I saw how they also are really being part of building back. And they had oil and gas tanks in order to heat their homes. They had that, but these became like really floating, ticking bombs when the flooding was there. So they want to avoid such a danger again. And this is why the citizens right there decided on their own to build back a district heating system that runs with wood pellets and with solar thermal energy. And, this is actually how we now need to build back better. It doesn't matter whether it's from the pandemic crisis or from a flood crisis or whatever, but whenever we need to rebuild something today, these days, it really needs to go in hand with criteria of resilience. And this is also true for investments, which was the third area. And the fourth was like being prepared and ready for those. So, for example, there were countries reporting on how they can actually send text messages to citizens, something that we in Germany don't have yet. But then one more point, which is important for me, is nature. I think really we need to integrate and like invite nature again into our concrete jungle in the city. I mean, if you have a natural soil, it can absorb rainwater or floodwater so much better actually. Plus, being more green also helps us in cooling down the city on heat wave days. So this is really what.
This is my field of expertise. So let me come back here. Yes, you're right. But if you manage it badly, then it can actually make the situation worse. Look at this picture, which is a picture from the flood in Germany. Don't look at the houses and the damage. Look at the hill behind it. What you see are vertical strips of vines, in this case, going up and down.
Here it is. It's arrived. Sorry.
Yeah. Right.
Carry on.
Don't look at the damage. Look at the hill above the damage. What you can see there are vertical strips of vines, in this case, which make perfect channel for the soil to come down. Look at the water at the bottom left. It's not blue, it's brown. It's filled with soils. Billions of tons of soil were washed away from it. Here is a picture. It's not in the same area, but it's in the same kind of landscape of a farm that is designed on a keyline system. If that farm gets the same amount of rainfall that fell on these areas in Germany, that water goes absolutely nowhere except into the soil. Why? Because the lines that you see there follow the contour of the land. Yes, it's more difficult to manage. There's a reason tractors go up and down a hill. It's easier, right? But this is the way to protect it. And this kind of resilient thinking is something that is going to become essential in the future, because it's a lot easier to prevent the damage from happening than to have to rebuild afterwards. I'll give you another example, which has to do with the way we manage land and the law of unintended consequences. This is a picture of a fire that swept across Portugal in 2018 that killed over 100 people. Why did that fire happen? Land abandonment. That means that the fuel builds up under the trees, and when it starts burning, it burns strongly. Why did land abandonment happen? Because after the revolution of 1974, the law changed. Until then, the oldest son inherited the farm. After that, every child inherited the farm equally. This coincided with a time when many people left the countryside to go to the cities to work. So what you found is from generation to generation, at a time when Portuguese families were still quite large, 4 to 6 children on average. So very rapidly, farms that were before that 20 or 30 hectares became half a hectare or a quarter of a hectare, belonging to people who were in the cities who didn't even know where it was any longer. Here is what the neighboring landscape looks like, and it's literally neighboring. This is a dehesa. This is the traditional way of managing the system there. And what you see there is animals that are grazing under trees that are adapted to fire. The fire also came into that area, but it was easy to stop that fire. It did not become destructive. Again, it's how you use the land that will dictate whether climate change turns into a catastrophe or a manageable challenge.
Yeah, this shows that we definitely need more biologists in our planning. It's funny, just a few days ago, also somebody wrote me on LinkedIn, look what I've invented. He invented PV, photovoltaics, that could stand on a hill and that will prevent those soil sliding, actually. So again, a nice example on how we know we can rebuild back better in a way that it's more resilient, plus it helps us with climate change mitigation.
Yeah, PV, the German habit of using glyphosate to kill life and put panels on farmland is profoundly stupid. Put the panels on parking lots. Have you ever walked in Berlin through a parking lot in summer when you went shopping? It's hot as hell. It's horrible. Every summer we read stories in the newspapers of babies dying because mums left them in the car for 10 minutes while they went shopping because the car got too hot. The panels on top provide shade and they don't take any extra room. So why doesn't it happen? Because the stilts are expensive. It doubles the cost of your installation. So here again is where we need new financing mechanisms so that people are encouraged to put the panels where they don't do any damage, instead of doing what they do today, which is to take perfectly good farmland out of production, killing it with glyphosate and replacing it with solar panels.
Yeah. And because I'm conscious we're nearing the end of our precious time together, I would like to, with all of this talk on what we're seeing, the floods, the fires, summers that are too hot to handle, all of these, adverse effects on the planet as we know it, it can feel quite overwhelming, I think, as an individual and as part of a system. So I would love to hear from both of you, actually, to try and give some practical tips on how should we be managing our climate anxiety for those who feel it. And you can, Rebecca, do you want to go first?
Well, for me, it is to surround myself with those good examples that are already out there, and to really get together with other people working on these alternatives, because we have them already, be it in business or also like cities, and we do have those examples, and working on these really gives me courage.
I would agree. I'm very, very lucky in that the job I do is one that allows me to grapple with these issues on a day-to-day basis, and that allows me to influence the way that other people decide how to run their businesses and their policies in order to make the world a better place. That's very few people have that, but everybody in their job has the ability to influence that job to try to become more regenerative, less damaging in one way or another. Another thing that's important is to remember always, it's not your fault. It's not your responsibility. You are just one out of 8 billion, and 8 billion is an enormous number, and you're not if it's anybody's fault, it's the fault of the most powerful, the ones who knew 30 years ago. Those are the ones who deserve to be in jail and tortured every day, right? It's not you. So that means that sometimes take a break, watch a good movie, go for a walk, get drunk with friends, read a good book, whatever. But don't think about it all the time.
That's true. Like, self-care is super important. I was also observing this a lot with young people getting even burnouts. So really take self-care, but at the same time also go into the self-efficiency and responsibility. We do all have our responsibility, and we have the power to change our surroundings, be it as an employee, as a citizen, or as a neighbor.
Absolutely. So take self-care in the form, as Patrick says, of a walk or watching a film. Perhaps don't take self-care in the form of flying to Cancun and hanging out with some new friends there. So be responsible. Yeah, be responsible, do what you can, and stay hopeful, which is exactly what we want people to be feeling leaving this webinar.
I would really recommend, even if you're in a city, one of the best things you can do for both the planet and self-care is get an allotment. An allotment is a little garden. I forget what you call them in Germany. But if you don't have a garden, if you don't live in a house, but you live in a flat, you can get on a waiting list to be awarded a small piece of land where lots of people have their own little garden. And whether you just go out there in the summer to sun yourself, or whether you start getting really into permaculture, doesn't matter. The fact that you're out there taking care of a little piece of land and helping things grow is the best self-care you can imagine.
Nature really has healing power. Yes.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, I'll have to get myself on a waiting list, Patrick. I wonder what East London has to offer.
That's there.
Yeah, I think I see them, and I think that would be lovely.
We see them along the train lines, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Brilliant. Well, I mean, I have dozens more questions myself, so I can't imagine how everybody else is feeling. The bad news is, unfortunately, that we've run out of time today, but the good news is that we are hoping to be at the beginning of a long journey of a series of webinars where we will address any other questions that people have. So thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Patrick. It's been such a pleasure to have you here and to chat with you today. We look forward to hopefully working with you, learning from you more in the future. And to everybody else, please keep your eye out for the next webinar that we will be hosting. Submit your questions when you get the chance, and we will see you at the next one.
Thank you so much for spreading these encouraging words.
Brilliant.
Thank you, Anna. It was an absolute pleasure.
Brilliant. Me too. Great to meet you guys and great to chat. See you soon.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.